They handed my daughter $15 million, a brand new house with white columns and gleaming windows, and a car so polished it looked like it had rolled straight out of a dream. My son received the rest of the fortune, neatly divided, like slices of a feast carved for hungry guests. And me? After 42 years of marriage, after giving every piece of myself to this family, I walked out of the will reading with nothing more than a single envelope. That was my inheritance. An envelope pressed into my palm while my children laughed behind me, their voices echoing in the hall like cruel bells. I had never felt smaller, never felt more discarded. But inside that envelope was something they could never have imagined, something that would change everything. My name is Patricia Morgan. I am 62 years old, a widow, and until that day I believed love and loyalty mattered more than money. I believed my children would stand by me in grief, that the bond we had built over a lifetime could not be broken by paper and ink. I was wrong. Remember to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below if you want to hear more. Grandma life stories filled with emotion, betrayal, and unexpected strength. The church smelled of lilies, heavy and sweet, too sweet for a funeral. Sunlight poured through the stained glass windows, painting the pews in fractured colors, but none of it reached my bones. My husband's coffin rested at the front, polished to a shine, surrounded by flowers that looked too alive for such a day. I sat in the front row, my hands trembling in my lap, while the whispers of my children floated behind me. "Finally, it's over," my daughter Samantha murmured, her voice sharp enough to pierce me even through the low hum of mourners. "Now we can move on with our lives." She did not lower her tone. I flinched but kept my gaze fixed forward. My son Daniel chuckled in response, a sound that felt foreign coming from his lips. They were my children, flesh of my flesh, yet in that moment they were strangers. I closed my eyes and saw Henry, my husband, as he had been in his final days. Tired, but smiling faintly, squeezing my hand with a promise only he seemed to believe in. "Trust me," he whispered, "everything will be all right." But sitting there in that cold pew, nothing felt all right. When the service ended, people came forward, touching my hand, murmuring words that slipped past me like smoke. I nodded stiffly, waiting for them to leave, waiting for the moment I dreaded most. Mr. Bennett, the family lawyer, and my husband's old friend, approached and guided me into a smaller adjoining room. My son and daughter were already waiting, perched on their chairs like vultures, eyes glinting with hunger, not grief. Mr. Bennett cleared his throat and unfolded the papers. His voice was formal, every word like a blade carving into me. "To my beloved children," he read, "I leave the sum of $15 million to be divided accordingly, as well as the new residence and the vehicles purchased this year." Samantha gasped, a sound of delight that made my skin crawl. Daniel leaned back, smiling triumphantly, as if victory had been handed to him on a platter. My stomach sank. I braced myself for the rest. Mr. Bennett paused, adjusted his glasses, and continued. "To my wife, my dearest companion of 42 years, I leave this letter." He placed a sealed envelope into my lap. My children stared for a heartbeat, stunned into silence, then erupted. Samantha's laughter was sharp, merciless. "A letter? After all that? That's all you get?" she jeered, her lips curling with cruel satisfaction. Daniel smirked, his voice dripping with contempt. "Looks like Dad thought you had enough already. Guess you'll have to live off memories." Their laughter filled the room, bouncing off the paneled walls, making me feel like I was shrinking into the chair. I lowered my eyes to the envelope, its weight heavier than gold. My husband's handwriting sprawled across the front, deliberate and steady. Every curve of the pen was chosen, careful. My fingers traced the seal, and for the first time since his death, something stirred inside me. Not despair, not grief, hope. I slipped the envelope into my purse, ignoring the laughter that clanged in my ears like cymbals. Whatever secret Henry had left for me, I would uncover it alone. I stood, my legs unsteady but my back straight. Samantha and Daniel continued to laugh, congratulating each other as if they had won some great prize. I turned and walked past them, each step echoing on the church floor like defiance. They could not see it, not yet, but a seed had been planted. Outside, the sun blinded me, too bright against the weight pressing on my chest. Guests filed out in clusters, voices low, faces respectful, but my children stood apart, their smiles wide, their arms already linked as though the future was theirs alone. I clutched the purse against me, feeling the envelope inside, cool and rigid. What could Henry have meant? Why only me? Why in this way? Questions burned, but I swallowed them down. At home that evening, the house felt cavernous without Henry's presence. The silence stretched, broken only by the groan of old wood and the hum of the refrigerator. I sat at the kitchen table with a single lamp casting a pool of yellow light, staring at the envelope. My hands trembled as I lifted it, the paper thick and firm beneath my fingertips. For hours I sat there, listening to the ghosts of my children's laughter, remembering the way Samantha's voice had dripped with disdain, the way Daniel's smirk had sliced through me like a blade. I pressed the envelope to my lips, closing my eyes. Whatever this was, whatever Henry had left, it was mine, not theirs. They could have the millions, the house, the cars. I had this, and I would hold on to it with everything I had left. The key to my future was waiting inside. That night, as the clock ticked past midnight, I finally broke the seal. The house was so quiet that night I could hear every groan of the floorboards, every sigh of the old walls. I sat at the kitchen table, the envelope trembling in my hands, the lamp casting long shadows across the room. I had waited until Samantha and Daniel were far from me, too busy celebrating their sudden wealth to think of the mother they had left behind. Only then did I dare to slit the envelope open. Inside was a single folded page, the paper thick and firm, carrying the unmistakable scent of Henry's study, ink, old leather, and a faint trace of cedar. My heart pounded as I unfolded it, my eyes catching the familiar, careful script. "My love," it began. "By now you will have endured the cruelty of our children's laughter. I did not intend it to wound you, but I knew it was the only way to reveal their true hearts. What they hold is nothing but a shadow. What is real, I have left to you." I pressed the paper to my chest, my throat tightening. Henry had known. He had known exactly how they would treat me, how quickly greed would strip away any pretense of love. He had known the cruelty of their words would cut deeper than the sharpest knife, and still he had trusted me to carry the secret. My eyes blurred as I continued to read. "You will find in this envelope a small key. It belongs to a safe deposit box at the bank on Ashland Avenue. Everything I could not trust them with rests inside. You alone are meant to open it. Do not let them know. Do not let them take this from you. Trust yourself, as I have trusted you. With love always, Henry." Something small and metallic clinked softly onto the table as I unfolded the paper further. There it was, nestled against the crease of the page. A brass key, no longer than my thumb, its number etched faintly along the stem. My hand closed around it instinctively, as though it might vanish if I let it go. For a long while I just sat there, staring at it. My husband's last secret. My pulse thudded in my ears. What could possibly be in that safe? More money? Documents? Or something far more dangerous? Something Henry knew could destroy them if it ever fell into the wrong hands. I thought of Samantha's laughter at the will reading, sharp as glass. I thought of Daniel's smirk, his voice dripping with contempt, as he told me I'd have to live off memories. My fingers tightened around the key. For years, I had endured their slights, their dismissive words, the way they made decisions as if I were no longer part of the family. I told myself they were busy, stressed, too young to understand. But today had stripped away all the excuses. Today, they had looked at me not as their mother, but as an obstacle. And Henry? He had seen it too. He had left this not for them, but for me, because he trusted me, even when they did not. I folded the letter carefully, sliding it back into its envelope, then tucked it into my purse. The key I placed in the drawer beside the sink, beneath a stack of folded dish towels. A flimsy hiding spot, but for now, it would do. My hands still shook. I needed time to think. I rose and walked slowly through the darkened house. Every creak of the floor made me startle. Every shadow against the wall felt like a threat. I half expected Samantha to burst through the door, her eyes flashing with suspicion, or Daniel to appear, demanding to know what was in my hands. But the house remained silent. They were gone, chasing their millions, blind to the secret I now carried. At the bedroom door, I paused. Henry's photograph sat on the dresser, his eyes steady, his smile small but sure. I touched the frame lightly. "What have you done, Henry?" I whispered. "What have you left me?" That night, I barely slept. Each sound outside made me think of footsteps in the yard. Each shadow cast by the moonlight seemed like an intruder slipping inside. But beneath the unease, something else stirred. For the first time since Henry's death, I felt not just grief or despair. I felt resolve. Tomorrow, I would go to the bank. Tomorrow, I would discover what he had truly left me. And tomorrow, my children's laughter might not echo quite so loudly. The hours dragged on until dawn. When the first light crept through the curtains, I rose from bed, my body aching, but my mind set. I pulled my coat tighter around me and checked the purse where the envelope lay hidden. The key, cold and metallic, slipped into my pocket. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the bitterness grounding me. As I sipped, I thought of Samantha's smug face, Daniel's arrogance. They believed they had won. They believed the world belonged to them now. And maybe it did, for now. But Henry had left me the power to change that. I walked to the front window, gazing out at the empty street. The world looked the same, quiet and ordinary, but inside me everything had shifted. My hands no longer trembled from weakness. They trembled with anticipation. The decision was made. I would go to the bank today. I would open the safe. And whatever Henry had left inside, I would claim it as mine. Not because I wanted riches, not because I craved power, but because it was the last thing he had entrusted to me, and I would not let our children steal that from his memory. I closed my eyes, holding the key in my palm. "This is mine," I whispered to the silence, "and I will protect it." The morning air bit sharply at my face as I stepped outside, the kind of cold that sank into your bones and refused to let go. I clutched my purse close to me, the brass key tucked into the lining of my coat pocket, its weight impossibly heavy for something so small. Every step toward the car felt like a step toward something larger than myself, something Henry had planned long before I could imagine. The drive to the bank on Ashland Avenue was both short and endless. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles pale. Each red light stretched forever. Every turn felt like a test. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Samantha's sleek car following me, or Daniel's smug face in a passing lane. But the road behind me was empty. The bank itself stood modestly at the corner of the avenue, a brick building with tall glass doors that gleamed in the thin sunlight. It wasn't the kind of place that flaunted wealth. Instead, it whispered of stability, discretion, secrets well kept. My chest tightened as I parked and sat for a moment, staring at the entrance. Henry had sent me here. He had chosen this place for the truth he wanted to reveal. Inside, the air was cool, touched with the faint metallic tang that seemed to cling to every bank. The tiled floor echoed under my shoes as I approached the counter. A young woman with careful eyes and a practiced smile looked up at me. "Good morning. How may I help you today?" My voice nearly caught in my throat, but I steadied it. I have a key, a deposit box. I need to access it." Her eyes softened, respectful. She asked for the key, her fingers brushing mine lightly as I placed it in her palm. She examined the etched number, then typed something into her computer. After a nod, she rose. "If you'll follow me, Mrs. Morgan, I'll take you to a private room." My legs felt unsteady as I followed her down a hallway lined with doors. At the end, she unlocked one and gestured for me to sit inside. "Just a moment," she said gently, then disappeared into the vault. The silence of that small room pressed against me, the walls too close, my heartbeat too loud. I folded my hands in my lap, trying to breathe evenly. This was it. Whatever Henry had hidden, I was about to uncover it. I thought of his smile, tired but resolute, the last time he held my hand. "Trust me," he had whispered. I clung to those words like a lifeline. The door opened again, and the young woman reappeared. She carried a long, narrow metal box with both hands, placing it carefully on the table before me. "Take your time," she said softly, then left me alone. For a long moment, I just stared at it. My fingers hovered above the lid, trembling. The box was unremarkable in appearance, gray and plain, yet it seemed to pulse with significance. I drew a deep breath, steadied myself, and lifted the lid. Inside lay neat bundles tied with twine, a thick leather journal worn at the edges, and a sealed envelope marked in Henry's precise handwriting. "For my wife's eyes only." My pulse quickened. I reached for the envelope first, tearing it open with careful hands. His script filled the page, steady as always. "My dearest Patricia, what you find here are the records of my real estate holdings, investment accounts, and business shares. These are not included in the official will. They are protected in trusts and accounts known only to me and Mr. Bennett. Their value is greater than what has been given to the children, much greater. I left these to you because only you will know how to protect them, and only you will know how to honor what we built together." My breath caught. Greater than 15 million. My children, who had strutted from the will reading like conquerors, had been handed scraps. And here before me lay the true weight of Henry's legacy. I pressed a hand to my mouth, tears stinging my eyes. He had known. He had seen their greed, their cruelty, and he had chosen me. He had trusted me to guard what mattered. For the first time since his death, I felt something other than grief. I felt power. With trembling fingers, I lifted the journal next. The leather creaked softly as I opened it. Henry's handwriting filled the pages, entries from the last year of his life. He wrote of his disappointment in the children, the way their hunger for wealth had consumed even their bond with one another. He wrote of his fear that I would be left alone against them, and of his love for me, steady and unshaken. "This is why I chose this path," he had written, "not to punish them, but to reveal them, and to give you the power to decide what comes next." I ran my hand over the words, tears slipping down my cheeks. He hadn't abandoned me to their laughter. He had armed me. I replaced the journal gently, then examined the folders. Inside were deeds to properties I had never even heard of, account numbers with balances so large they made my head spin, shares in companies Henry had never spoken about at home. Quietly, methodically, he had built something enormous, and now it rested in my hands. I closed the box slowly, my breath shallow. My children had no idea. They thought they had won, thought their father had favored them over me. But they were blind. Henry had left me the heart of his legacy, and with it, the power to face whatever storm came next. When the young woman returned to escort me out, I held the box close to my chest, the weight of it pressing not only against my arms, but against my very soul. As I walked back through the bank, the air felt different, charged, as though the ground itself had shifted beneath my feet. Outside, the world looked unchanged. Cars passed, people hurried along the sidewalks, the sun glinted on the glass doors. But for me, everything was altered. My children's laughter from yesterday still echoed in my mind, but now it sounded hollow. They had no idea what I carried home with me. The box was too heavy with meaning to leave in plain sight. When I arrived home, I carried it carefully through the quiet house, my ears straining for every sound. I set it on my bedroom dresser, then pulled open the trunk at the foot of the bed, the one lined with old quilts and unused blankets. I nestled the box beneath them, layering the fabric until no trace of it remained. Henry's journal, though, I kept closer. That went into the nightstand drawer, under a neat pile of folded scarves. I wanted it near me, its pages a comfort and a shield. For a few days, I tried to live as though nothing had changed. I baked bread, folded laundry, sat on the porch with tea. But inside, everything was shifting. I had secrets now. Power. and secrets always carry a weight that is hard to hide. My children noticed. Samantha came first. She arrived one late afternoon, unannounced as usual, her heels clicking across the hardwood floor like small hammers. She swept into the kitchen with her smile too wide, too practiced. "Mother," she said, drawing the word out, "how are you? You look better than I expected." I stirred the soup simmering on the stove and forced a soft smile. "I'm managing." Her eyes darted across the counters, the table, the corners of the room, as though searching for something out of place. "Daniel and I were talking," she continued, dropping her purse onto the chair with a thud. "We can't believe you were left with only a letter. It seems so unfair." Her tone was syrupy, but beneath it was steel. I tightened my grip on the wooden spoon. "Your father made his choices. I won't question them." She leaned on the counter, tilting her head. "But don't you wonder if he left something else? Something hidden?" I kept my gaze on the pot. "No." There was a silence then, thick and heavy. I could feel her eyes burning into my back. When I finally turned, her smile was gone. "Because you seem different, Mother," she said slowly. "Not broken, not defeated. Almost like—" She trailed off, her gaze narrowing. "Almost like you know something." The spoon slipped from my hand and clattered against the stove. For a heartbeat, the air between us crackled. Then I drew myself up, forcing calm into my voice. "Your father left me memories," I said evenly. "And that is enough." She studied me for a long moment, her lips curling into a smirk that reminded me of her childhood defiance, twisted now into something cruel. "If you say so," she murmured, retrieving her purse. "But if I find out you're hiding something—" She let the words hang, unfinished, like a blade left suspended above my head. Then she turned and left, the door slamming behind her. That night, unease haunted me. I checked the trunk twice, the nightstand 3 times, my hands trembling as I touched the scarves that covered Henry's journal. Samantha had seen through me, at least in part. She could smell secrets, like a wolf scents blood. The next morning, Daniel appeared. Unlike his sister, he arrived with false politeness, knocking gently before stepping inside with a bottle of wine tucked under his arm. "For you, Mother," he said, his smile warm, his voice smooth. I accepted the bottle with stiff hands. "Thank you." We sat at the kitchen table, the morning light slanting across the worn wood. He spoke of trivial things at first, his new car, the friends he planned to entertain, the vacation home Samantha was considering in Florida. But then his tone shifted. "You know, Mother," he said casually, swirling the glass of water I had poured for him, "it must be strange, being left with only that envelope. Samantha and I keep thinking, surely Father wouldn't have left you with nothing." I forced a faint smile. "He left me what he thought best." Daniel leaned forward, his eyes sharp despite his easy grin. "If there's more, you should tell us. It would be easier for everyone." I set my cup down with deliberate calm. "There is nothing more." He nodded slowly, as though humoring me, but the look in his eyes chilled me. He didn't believe me. Neither of them did. That evening, I heard the faint creak of floorboards upstairs while I folded laundry in the living room. My heart lurched. I set the basket aside and climbed the stairs quietly, my hand gripping the banister until my knuckles ached. The sight that met me froze me in place. Samantha was crouched beside my dresser, rifling through the drawers, her hands shoving scarves and sweaters aside with ruthless impatience. "What are you doing?" My voice cracked like a whip. She jerked upright, spinning around. I was looking for the photo album," she stammered, though her cheeks burned with guilt. "That's my private room," I snapped, stepping closer, my pulse hammering. "You will not search it again." Her eyes flickered, resentment sparking like fire. But she brushed past me without another word, her perfume sharp in the air. I stood there, shaking, staring at the open drawer, the scarves scattered like fallen leaves. Beneath them, Henry's journal still lay safe, but the warning was clear. They would not stop. They would tear through every corner of this house until they found what they wanted. That night, I sat awake in bed, clutching the journal to my chest, its leather cool against my skin. My children no longer saw me as a grieving widow. They saw me as a gatekeeper, and what I held frightened them, because it meant they didn't hold all the power. The thought terrified me, but it also sparked something deeper, a flicker of strength. For the first time in years, I wasn't bending beneath their will. I was standing, even if only barely. The days after Samantha's intrusion carried a strange heaviness. I tried to busy myself with little tasks, polishing Henry's old watch, tending to the garden, straightening photographs on the wall, but I could feel suspicion hanging in the air like smoke after a fire. They were circling me, waiting for me to stumble. One evening, as I cleared the dinner dishes, I heard muffled voices from the porch. The curtains hung just enough to let their shapes blur behind the glass, but I would have recognized those voices anywhere. Samantha and Daniel, my children. I stilled, clutching a plate in my hands, straining to catch every word. "She knows something," Samantha hissed. "I can see it in her eyes. She's hiding something from us." Daniel's laugh was low and cruel. "Then we make her give it up. She can't live in that house forever, not when she's too fragile to handle things. A care facility, maybe. Somewhere she can't keep secrets." The plate in my hands nearly slipped. They weren't whispering about love or care. They were plotting exile. Samantha's voice rose sharper. "If she won't hand it over, we'll force her. Power of attorney, guardianship, whatever it takes." My chest tightened. Guardianship. The word tasted like iron on my tongue. To strip me of control, to declare me incompetent. It wasn't enough for them to have 15 million. The house, the cars. They wanted more. They wanted everything. I pressed myself against the wall, heart hammering, listening to their laughter drift through the door. It wasn't the laughter of children sharing a joke. It was the laughter of wolves circling their prey. When the front door finally opened, I returned to the sink, rinsing dishes as though nothing had happened. They walked in, all easy smiles and false cheer, but I could see the calculation in their eyes. "Mother," Daniel said smoothly, loosening his tie, "you should think about what's best for you. This house is too big, too much for you to handle alone." I kept my gaze on the water swirling down the drain. "I've managed this house my entire life." Samantha leaned against the counter, her nails tapping a steady beat on the wood. "Things change. You're not as strong as you used to be." The words pierced, but I swallowed them down. "I don't need strength to live in my own home. I need peace." Her smile was thin, humorless. "Peace comes when everyone knows where things stand. Secrets only create chaos." They exchanged a look then, a silent agreement that made my skin crawl. I forced my breath steady, but inside me something clenched tighter than fear. They were no longer hiding what they wanted. That night, I lay awake long after the lights were out. The memory of their voices, the casual cruelty of their plan, played in a loop in my mind. The children I had raised were preparing to declare me unfit, to lock me away as though I were already dead. I thought of Henry's journal in the drawer, his words written with foresight sharper than any blade. He had seen this coming. He had left me the tools not just to survive, but to fight. But still, I couldn't silence the ache. They were my children. I remembered Samantha's tiny hand clutching mine on her first day of school. I remembered Daniel's laughter when he built his first kite. And now, those same hands and that same laughter were planning to erase me. I rose from bed and walked to the window, looking out at the still night. The moonlight silvered the lawn, the fence, the porch where they had stood whispering. Somewhere deep inside, grief twisted into resolve. If they thought I was defenseless, they were wrong. The next morning, I found them in the living room, their voices rising again. Papers spread across the coffee table, brochures for senior homes, notes scrawled on legal pads. Samantha looked up as I entered, her expression cool. "Mother, we've been talking," she said. "It's time we considered your future. A facility would take care of you, make sure you're safe." Daniel added, "It's practical. We could handle the estate, manage everything. You'd be comfortable." Comfortable. The word dripped with mockery. Comfortable meant powerless. Comfortable meant silenced. I folded my arms, steadying my voice. "This is my future, not yours. I'm not going anywhere." Daniel's eyes hardened. "You don't get to decide if you're incapable." The silence stretched, heavy as lead. They waited for me to flinch, to bow my head, to surrender. But I stood still, my hands trembling only slightly. They would never know what I held hidden, the documents and accounts locked safely away, the trap Henry had designed for moments exactly like this. They saw me as weak. They mistook my quiet for defeat. And though my heart ached with every cruel word, I knew now that I could not afford to break. Not for them, not for anyone. I hadn't expected him that evening. The house was still heavy with silence after Samantha and Daniel had left, their words lingering like poison in the air. I sat at the dining table with Henry's journal open in front of me, though I hadn't been reading. My eyes drifted over the ink without seeing, my mind caught between grief and fury. That's when I heard the hesitant knock at the door. It wasn't the sharp, demanding pound of Daniel or the impatient rap of Samantha. It was softer, uncertain, almost apologetic. I opened the door and found Ethan standing there, shoulders hunched against the wind, his hands stuffed deep in the pockets of his hoodie. His hair hung in his eyes, damp from the mist outside, and when he looked up at me, I saw not the arrogance of his parents, but something raw. "Grandma," he whispered, "can I come in?" I stepped aside without a word. He walked in slowly, as though afraid to disturb the quiet, and dropped onto the couch, sinking into the cushions like the weight of the world was pressing him down. For a while, neither of us spoke. I busied myself with the kettle, the sound of water filling it a small comfort. When I set a mug of tea in front of him, his hands wrapped around it tightly, as if drawing strength from the heat. "They're fighting again," he said finally, his voice low and tired. "Mom and Dad. Always about you, about money, about what they think you're hiding." His words faltered, then steadied. "It's all they talk about now. They don't even talk to me." I sat across from him, my heart aching. "I know," I said softly. He glanced up, his eyes uncertain. "Are you hiding something? Is there really more than what they got?" The question hung in the air like a blade. I searched his face for malice, for greed, but all I saw was worry. He wasn't asking for riches, he was asking for truth. Or I reached for Henry's journal, sliding it across the table until it rested in front of him. Slowly, I opened it to a page I had marked, Henry's steady hand filling the lines. "They must learn that love is the only wealth that endures," he had written. "If they cannot, then they will lose everything. But if even one soul remains uncorrupted, then our legacy is safe." Ethan traced the words with his finger, lips moving as he read. When he looked up, his eyes glistened. He meant me, didn't he? I swallowed the lump in my throat. He meant anyone who still remembers what matters. And yes, I believe he meant you. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then he leaned closer, lowering his voice. "They've been searching your room. I heard Mom tell Dad that if they find proof, they'll take you to court. She said if they can prove you're not thinking clearly, they can get control of everything." I felt the blood drain from my face. "I know," I whispered. "They're serious, Grandma." His voice cracked, the boy and the man inside him colliding in that moment. "They don't just want the money. They want you gone." I closed the journal, resting my hand over his. My fingers were cold, but my grip was steady. "And what about you, Ethan? What do you want?" His gaze met mine, clear and unwavering. "I want you safe. I don't care about the money. I don't want to lose you too." The words struck me deeper than I could have imagined. For so long, I had felt alone, cornered by the very children I had brought into this world. And here was their child, my grandson, bridging that emptiness with a loyalty they had long forgotten. We sat in silence for a while, the tea cooling between us. Then Ethan shifted, pulling something from the pocket of his hoodie. His phone. He placed it on the table, the screen glowing faintly. "I recorded them," he said quietly. "Last night. They didn't know I was in the hallway. They said—" He swallowed hard, pressing play. The voices spilled into the room, sharp and venomous, my daughter's voice dripping with contempt. "She doesn't know what she's doing. If we take it to court, the judge will see she's incompetent." Daniel's laugh followed, cruel and certain. "We'll get everything she's hiding. Trust me, by the time we're finished, she'll be sitting in a home, and we'll be sitting on her fortune." Ethan stopped the recording, his hand shaking slightly. "I thought you should hear it." My throat tightened. Their voices, their betrayal, laid bare in a way that could never be denied. Evidence, proof, and brought to me by the one person they had underestimated. "You've done the right thing," I told him, squeezing his hand. "Thank you." His eyes shone with something fierce, something I hadn't seen in him before. "You can't fight them alone, Grandma, but you don't have to. I'll help you." I studied his face, so young, and yet already bearing the weight of scars his parents had carved into him. He wasn't wrong. Alone, I was vulnerable. But with him, I wasn't just defending myself. I was building something Henry would have been proud of. We spent the rest of the evening at the dining table, the surface littered with folders, old envelopes, and the faint smell of aged paper. Ethan handled each document carefully, his long fingers tracing words he barely understood, but his attention never wavered. I explained what I could, trusts, deeds, accounts, and he listened with the seriousness of someone far older than 16. "Why did Grandpa hide all this?" he asked softly, lifting a paper where Daniel's name had been crossed out and replaced with mine. "Because he knew what your parents would become," I answered, steadying my voice. "He wanted to make sure what we built together wasn't destroyed by greed." Ethan nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. "They don't care about family. They only care about money." I reached across the table, touching his hand again. "And you?" His eyes lifted to mine, steady and clear. "I care about you." The ache in my chest softened just a little. Henry had left me alone, but not entirely. He had left me this boy, this quiet ally, this spark of hope. When he left that night, the journal tucked safely back into the drawer and the documents hidden once more, I stood at the doorway watching him disappear into the mist. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel entirely defenseless. I had someone on my side, and that changed everything. The rain had stopped by the next morning, leaving the streets damp and shining under a pale gray sky. I moved through the house with deliberate slowness, checking the locks, closing curtains, and straightening the stack of blankets over the trunk at the foot of my bed. My hands lingered on the fabric, pressing it down as though weight alone could keep secrets safe. Henry's journal remained in the nightstand drawer, beneath scarves I had folded with the precision of ritual. Every detail mattered now. Every choice could mean survival. By late afternoon, the house had settled into its familiar rhythm. The hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of aging wood, the muffled tick of the clock in the hallway. I had just set a kettle on the stove when the front door rattled. Not a polite knock, a shove. My pulse spiked. I set the kettle aside, wiping my damp palms on my apron. The door swung open, and Daniel stepped inside without waiting for an answer. His eyes swept across the room like a searchlight, sharp and invasive. Samantha followed close behind, her heels striking the floor in crisp, impatient beats. "Mother," Daniel said smoothly, but the softness of his tone didn't match the tension in his jaw. "We need to talk." "I wasn't expecting you," I replied, forcing calm, though my fingers curled into fists at my sides. Samantha's gaze darted over the living room, her expression tight. "We've been thinking about things, about Dad, about what he might have left behind." "I told you," I said firmly. "He left you what he thought you deserved, and me, what he thought I needed." Daniel smiled thinly. "We're not convinced." They spread out through the room like hunters flushing game. Samantha drifted toward the bookshelf, sliding her fingers along the spines. Daniel moved to the dining table, lifting placemats, opening drawers. My heart pounded as I realized what they were doing. They weren't here to talk. They were here to search. "Stop this," I snapped, stepping forward. "You have no right." Samantha turned, her eyes glinting with cold amusement. "We have every right. We're his children. If he left something, it belongs to us as much as to you." Her words cut like glass. My voice shook, but I held my ground. "This is my home. You don't get to ransack it." Daniel ignored me, striding down the hall. I followed, but by the time I reached the bedroom, he was already pulling open drawers, rifling through shirts and folded linens. Samantha appeared behind me, her smirk growing as though each tossed scarf, each disturbed corner brought her closer to victory. I lunged forward, slamming the drawer shut. "Enough!" Daniel straightened, his eyes narrowing. "If you're hiding something, we'll find it. You're only making this worse for yourself." They stormed out not long after, leaving chaos in their wake. My bedroom looked like a battlefield. Scarves scattered, blankets dragged across the floor, drawers gaping open like wounded mouths. I dropped to my knees beside the trunk, my hands trembling as I pulled the blankets aside. The lock was scratched, the lid slightly ajar. My breath caught. Inside lay a folder, its edges bent, its cover ripped halfway through. I snatched it up, flipping through with frantic hands. Empty. They had found something, but not the truth. Beneath the false bottom, hidden in a compartment Henry had built years ago, the real files remained untouched. Thick binders, marked with numbers and names only he and I would recognize. My chest heaved as relief washed through me. Henry had known. He had prepared for this. He had even taught me once, in a quiet moment long before his illness, how to disguise what mattered with decoys. At the time, I thought it a game. Now it was salvation. I sat back against the trunk, clutching the empty folder, a ragged laugh escaping me. They believed they had struck gold. All they carried away was nothing. Old receipts, scraps of paper, documents I had planted days ago. They would think they had triumphed. They would think I was finished. And that mistake would be their undoing. Night fell heavy over the house. I locked the doors twice, checked every window, and still felt the walls tremble with the memory of their invasion. When I finally lay down, Henry's journal clutched to my chest. My body refused to relax. Every creak upstairs, every shadow shifting across the ceiling, I imagined them coming back, hungrier, more reckless. But even in that fear, another feeling grew. Not despair, not weakness, resolve. They had crossed a line. They had made me a prisoner in my own home, and I would not forgive that. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with a fresh pot of coffee and stared at the empty folder. My hands no longer shook. Henry's voice lingered in my memory, steady as always. "Trust yourself. You are stronger than you believe." The morning after their intrusion, I woke with the weight of decision pressing on my chest. Fear lingered, but it was different now. Less a chain and more a blade. I could no longer pretend this was only grief, or that I could endure quietly until the storm passed. They had turned their cruelty into a plan. That meant I needed one of my own. By noon, I found myself walking the long hallway of Mr. Bennett's office. The polished wood floors gleamed under the light, and the faint scent of leather and old books clung to the air. His secretary looked up as I entered, offering a small nod of recognition before ushering me toward his door. When I stepped inside, he rose from behind his desk, tall and steady, his hair silver but his posture still commanding. He crossed the room and took my hand warmly. "Patricia," he said, his voice firm yet kind, "I've been expecting you." The word startled me. "Expecting me?" He gestured for me to sit, then closed the door with deliberate care. "Henry told me you'd come. He wasn't sure when, but he knew." I lowered myself into the chair, clutching my purse tightly in my lap. "He left me a key to the deposit box." Mr. Bennett nodded. his eyes steady. "And you've seen what was inside?" "Yes, the deeds, the accounts, his journal, more than I ever imagined." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "Then it's time you understood the rest. Henry didn't just leave you wealth, he left you protection." My pulse quickened. "Protection?" Bennett pulled open a drawer and lifted out a thick envelope, its seal unbroken, Henry's handwriting marking the front. "For Patricia, through Bennett." He slid it across the desk toward me. My breath caught as I reached for it, my fingers tracing the familiar script. "Henry was meticulous," Bennett said. "He knew your children's hearts better than they knew themselves. He feared they would use the courts to strip you of your independence, to declare you incapable. So he built a safeguard." I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a stack of documents, crisp and precise. At the top was a trust agreement, naming me sole trustee, with layers of clauses I could barely follow. Beneath that, a set of instructions outlining conditions that shifted the burden of risk onto anyone who contested the will. I read the bolded line twice, scarcely believing. Any heir who initiates legal action against Patricia Morgan or the estate forfeits their inheritance and assumes liability for estate debts. My hand trembled as I looked up. "If they take me to court, they lose everything," Bennett finished, his voice steady. "Not only lose, they become responsible for debts and taxes tied to what they've already claimed. 15 million, the house, the cars, turned from gifts into weights around their necks. Henry wanted to make sure their greed was their undoing." I sat back, my breath shallow. He set a trap. Bennett's mouth curved in the faintest smile. "A safeguard, one that only works if you remain silent until the moment is right. If they try to destroy you, they destroy themselves." For the first time in weeks, my shoulders loosened. The ground beneath me, once so unsteady, felt solid again. "He thought of everything," I whispered. "He thought of you," Bennett corrected gently. "He told me often that you were stronger than you believed. He wanted to give you the tools to fight, but he trusted that you'd know when to use them." I folded the papers carefully, placing them back into the envelope. My heart still raced, but now with a different rhythm. Fear was still there, but so was something else. Clarity. "What do I do now?" I asked. "Live," Bennett replied simply. "Do not let them see what you hold. Let them underestimate you. Let them believe you are weak. When they move against you, we'll be ready." I rose slowly, the envelope clutched against my chest. His words settled deep inside me. For so long I had thought of myself as a widow left behind, powerless against the tide of greed. But Henry had seen differently. Bennett had seen it too. And maybe, finally, I could begin to see it myself. At the door, Bennett paused me with a final word. "Patricia," he said, his eyes locking with mine, "remember, silence is not surrender. Sometimes it is the sharpest weapon of all." The ride home was quiet, but my thoughts were alive. The streets rolled past, familiar houses blurring together. Inside me, a line had been drawn. I no longer felt like prey. I felt like someone waiting, watching, ready. When I stepped back into the house, the silence greeted me again. But it no longer felt suffocating. It felt like a pause before a storm, a stillness that carried weight. I tucked the envelope into the trunk, beneath Henry's hidden compartment, layering blankets over it with careful hands. That night, as I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, Ethan's recording replayed in my mind. The cruelty of Samantha's voice, the arrogance in Daniel's laugh. They believed they were building their victory. But now I knew the truth. Henry had built something far stronger than greed, a safeguard bound by law, designed to shatter their pride. The storm broke sooner than I expected. It was a Thursday morning, pale light spilling through the curtains when I found a thick envelope waiting in the mailbox. My hand shook as I pulled it free, the weight of it unmistakable. Legal papers, summons. My children had made their move. I carried it inside and set it on the kitchen table, staring at the bold black letters across the top. Petition for guardianship. The words blurred as tears stung my eyes. They were doing exactly as they had whispered, exactly as I had feared. They wanted the court to strip me of my rights, to declare me incapable, to take everything into their hands. I opened the papers with trembling fingers. Their signatures glared up at me, Samantha's loops confident, Daniel's strokes sharp and impatient. The accusations were cruel, each line heavier than the last. They claimed I was forgetful, unstable, incapable of handling finances. They said I was vulnerable to manipulation, unfit to manage even my own home. Each word was a knife, carving away not only at my dignity, but at the love I once believed we shared. They weren't simply trying to take control of money. They were erasing me. I sat in silence for a long while, my hands pressed flat against the table to steady myself. Then, slowly, I rose and went to the nightstand. I pulled out Henry's journal, the familiar leather grounding me, his words a steady whisper in my mind. Trust yourself. You are stronger than you believe. I called Mr. Bennett. He answered on the first ring, his voice calm, steady as a stone in the river. When I told him what had come, there was no surprise in his tone, only quiet resolve. "Patricia," he said, "this is what Henry prepared us for. Do not despair. We have what we need." That afternoon we met in his office. The petition lay on his desk between us, its accusations stark in the afternoon light. Bennett read them carefully, his brow furrowing only slightly before he reached for the envelope he had given me days before. He spread the documents across the desk, aligning them with precision. "Here," he said, tapping the bolded line of Henry's safeguard. "This is where their greed will undo them. The moment they filed this petition, they triggered the clause. By trying to take control of your estate, they have forfeited everything left to them. Not only forfeited, it has converted their inheritance into liability." I stared at the words, my breath shallow. "So, when they walk into that courtroom, they will be walking into their own ruin," Bennett finished. "The judge will see the safeguard. It is ironclad. And when it is enforced, they will not be victorious heirs. They will be debtors, burdened by the very things they thought they had won." A strange sound escaped me, half sob, half laugh. For weeks, I had been suffocating under fear, certain I would be stripped of everything. And now, the truth was here. They had dug their own grave. Bennett placed a hand over mine, firm and grounding. "Patricia, you will need to endure their cruelty in court. They will attack your mind, your memory, your dignity. But you must hold steady. Do not reveal what you know until the moment is right. Let them believe they are winning. And when the judge sees the documents, the trap will close." I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of both dread and resolve settle into me. "I can do it," I whispered. "For Henry. For Ethan." That night, I sat with Ethan at the kitchen table, the petition lying between us. He read silently, his jaw tightening with every line. When he finally looked up, his eyes burned with anger. "They would do this to you? Their own mother?" I reached across the table, brushing his hand. "They already have. But they won't win," he said fiercely. "Not this time." I studied him, the boy who was becoming a man far too quickly. He shouldn't have had to bear witness to his parents' betrayal, to the ugliness of greed. And yet he had chosen to stand with me. That choice, more than any document or safeguard, was what gave me strength. In the quiet of that evening, I closed my eyes and imagined Henry beside me, his hand warm around mine. I imagined him smiling, not with triumph, but with the quiet satisfaction of a man whose faith in me was being proven true. He had trusted me to endure, to fight, to protect what mattered. The days that followed were filled with preparation. Bennett guided me through each step, rehearsing what I would say, reminding me of the power I held. "They will paint you as weak," he told me, "but you must let them. Weakness is the mask that will blind them, and when the truth is revealed, their arrogance will be their undoing." On the eve of the hearing, I stood before the mirror in my bedroom, Henry's journal clutched to my chest. The woman staring back at me looked older than she felt, lines carved deep from years of sacrifice and sorrow. but behind her eyes burned something they could never erase: resolve. The summons lay on the dresser, its ink bold, its accusations cruel. Yet as I looked at it, I no longer felt fear. I felt clarity. This was no longer just a battle over money. It was a battle for dignity, for truth, for the legacy Henry and I had built together. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and old paper, a mixture of solemnity and judgment. I sat at the long oak table beside Mr. Bennet, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, my pulse thundering in my ears. Across the aisle, Samantha and Daniel whispered with their attorney, their eyes darting toward me with smug confidence. They looked like victors before the battle had even begun, as if they believed the gavel had already struck in their favor. The judge entered, robed and stern, and the room rose to its feet. My knees trembled as I stood, but I held my chin high. This was the stage Henry had prepared for, the very moment his plan was meant to unfold. The proceedings began with their lawyer. He painted me as a frail widow clinging to memories, incapable of handling my affairs. His voice was smooth but cruel, every sentence a dagger dressed in politeness. "Mrs. Morgan is vulnerable," he declared, gesturing toward me with a flourish. "Her advanced age and fragile state of mind make her an easy target for manipulation. For her protection, guardianship must be granted to her children." My children sat straighter at those words, Samantha with her lips curved in a victorious smile, Daniel adjusting his cufflinks like a man sealing a deal. My stomach knotted. How could they sit there, so brazen, knowing what they were doing to me? The lawyer continued, recounting supposed lapses in memory, twisting every hesitation I had shown since Henry's death into signs of decline. Each lie struck harder than the last, and I felt the eyes of the courtroom on me, pitying, doubting, weighing. When it was Bennett's turn, the air shifted. He rose with calm precision, gathering his papers into a neat stack before addressing the court. His voice was firm, steady, carrying the weight of authority born not from bluster, but from truth. "Your Honor," he began, "the petition before you is not about protection. It is about greed. These children, grown adults, received extraordinary wealth at their father's will reading. $15 million, homes, vehicles, assets beyond what most could dream. And yet they return, seeking to strip their mother not only of dignity, but of independence. Why? Because they believe there is more, and because greed is never satisfied." Gasps rippled through the room. Samantha shifted uneasily, though her smile remained. Daniel leaned back, his jaw tightening. Bennett unfolded one of Henry's documents, the parchment crisp, the ink bold. Henry Morgan anticipated this very betrayal. He placed safeguards in the trust to ensure that if his wife, Patricia, were ever attacked in such a way, the truth would prevail. That safeguard is clear and binding. By filing this petition, the petitioners have triggered the forfeiture clause. The judge leaned forward, brows furrowed. "Explain." Bennett's voice cut cleanly through the silence. "By seeking guardianship, Samantha and Daniel Morgan have violated the terms of their inheritance. As of this filing, their gifts are no longer protected assets. They have converted into liabilities. The estates, the cars, the funds, everything they claimed are now debts tied to their names. They are personally responsible for the taxes and obligations connected to them. They have not secured power. They have secured ruin." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Samantha's face drained of color, her lips parting in disbelief. Daniel leaned forward sharply, hissing something at his attorney, who frantically flipped through the documents as though searching for an escape that didn't exist. I sat in silence, my hands still clasped, my breath steady for the first time in weeks. This was Henry's voice echoing through Bennett's words, Henry's wisdom guiding every stroke of ink on those pages. Samantha shot to her feet, her voice shrill. "This is a trick. Father wouldn't have done this to us." The judge's gavel struck sharply. "Order!" His eyes pinned her with cool authority. "You will sit." Daniel stood as well, desperation creeping into his polished veneer. "She's manipulating this. She's not capable of understanding what Father intended. He would never— Bennett cut him off, sliding forward another document. Your Honor, Henry Morgan executed these papers in my presence. His signature is notarized. His intent is unambiguous. He entrusted everything to his wife, and he built this safeguard precisely to protect her from this moment. Their objections carry no weight against the law. The judge scanned the papers, his lips tightening, the silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Finally, he set them down, his voice echoing across the room. This court finds no basis for guardianship. The petition is denied. Furthermore, per the terms of the trust, the petitioners have forfeited their inheritance and are now liable for the debts attached. Case dismissed. The gavel struck once, sharp and final. The words rang in my ears like a bell of freedom. Samantha collapsed into her chair, her face buried in her hands. Daniel sat rigid, fury radiating from every line of his body. Their lawyer muttered something, but no one listened. The court had spoken. I remained seated for a moment longer, breathing in the silence that followed. Then I rose slowly, steadying myself with the edge of the table. My eyes swept across the room, catching my children's for the briefest moment. They had come to strip me of everything. Instead, they had lost it all. Bennett touched my arm gently as we turned to leave. It is done, he murmured. Outside the courthouse, the air was crisp and clear, as if the world itself had shifted. Ethan waited on the steps, his young face alight with relief. He rushed to me, wrapping me in an embrace that steadied my trembling heart. For the first time since Henry's passing, I felt truly safe, not because I had wealth or power in my hands, but because justice had spoken. The storm my children unleashed had turned back on them, and I remained standing. The days after the courtroom felt different, as though the very air in town had shifted. For weeks, whispers had followed me wherever I went, neighbors offering sympathetic looks, shopkeepers lowering their voices when my name slipped into conversation. But now, when I walked down Main Street to buy bread or stood in line at the pharmacy, those same voices carried a new tone: respect, vindication, sometimes even admiration. But for Samantha and Daniel, it was the opposite. The news of their downfall traveled faster than I ever could. People in our small circle of friends, the very people who had once fawned over them at parties and envied their windfall, now shook their heads in disbelief. 15 million, and they still went after their mother, I overheard one woman say at the post office. What kind of children do that? Word spread quickly that the assets they had flaunted, Samantha's new car, Daniel's vacation plans, were now gone. The trust's safeguard had stripped it all away. The house that had been handed to Samantha at the will reading was repossessed within a week. Daniel's accounts froze, his shiny new sports car towed away in broad daylight. One afternoon, as I watered the roses Henry had planted years ago, Mrs. Coleman, my neighbor, leaned over the fence. Her eyes were wide, her voice low but fierce. I saw them arguing in the driveway, she whispered. Daniel shouting, Samantha crying. The car was being hauled away, and she screamed at him, "This is your fault." The whole street heard it. I felt no triumph in her words, only a weary ache. My children had built their own destruction, and now they were left with nothing but bitterness. Ethan visited often in those days, helping me repair the small damages their anger had left in the house. We fixed a broken drawer, straightened the curtains they had pulled down, and even repainted the porch swing together. He didn't speak much about his parents, but when he did, it was with a mixture of sadness and shame. "They don't even look at me," he said one evening as we sat on the porch. "They argue all the time, but when I try to talk, they act like I'm invisible, like I'm just a reminder of what they lost." I reached for his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "You are not what they lost, Ethan. You are what they forgot to value, and that makes you more precious than all the rest." He smiled faintly, though the pain lingered in his eyes. Meanwhile, Samantha tried to cling to appearances. I saw her once at the grocery store, her cart half full, her face pale and drawn. When she noticed me in the aisle, her chin lifted with defiance, but her eyes betrayed her. They were hollow, rimmed with sleepless nights. She didn't approach me. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke louder than any words could. Daniel, on the other hand, carried his fury like a torch. I heard he had confronted Bennett after the hearing, shouting in the middle of the courthouse lobby until security escorted him out. Rumors swirled of unpaid debts, of friends cutting ties, of business partners refusing to answer his calls. His polished charm had soured into desperation, and people could smell it. I did not gloat. I did not celebrate. But I did not grieve for them either. They had chosen their path, and now they walked it. One evening, I sat in Henry's old armchair, the journal open on my lap. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting long shadows across the room. I read his words slowly, savoring the way they echoed his voice in my mind. "Justice is not revenge," he had written. "It is truth revealed in its own time." As I traced those words with my finger, I realized what I had been feeling since the verdict. Not joy, not triumph, relief. For so long, I had lived under the shadow of their contempt, bent low beneath the weight of their greed. Now, at last, the truth had been revealed. That truth carried consequences far beyond the courtroom. Old friends began calling, not out of pity, but out of genuine respect. Mrs. Coleman came by with a casserole, shaking her head. "You showed them," she said firmly. "You showed all of us what dignity looks like." But in the quiet of the night, when the house was still, I thought not of dignity or victory. I thought of the little girl Samantha had once been, who used to braid flowers into my hair. I thought of Daniel's boyish grin when he brought home a goldfish from the county fair. Those children were gone, replaced by strangers shaped by greed. And though justice had been done, the wound of losing them would never fully heal. Yet even in that sorrow, there was light. Ethan's laughter echoed in the halls now, his footsteps a reminder that all was not lost. Henry's legacy lived on in him, in the way he cared, the way he stood beside me when no one else would. The fallout had broken Samantha and Daniel, but it had not broken me. It had left me standing, weary but unbowed, with love enough to build something new. It was late on a Tuesday when the knock came, soft at first, and then louder, more insistent. I had been sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea cooling in my hands, the steam long since vanished. Ethan was upstairs finishing homework, and the quiet of the house had been almost comforting. When the sound rattled the front door again, I stood, every muscle tight. For a moment I thought it might be Daniel, full of fury and desperation. But when I opened the door, it was Samantha. She looked nothing like the daughter who had smirked at me during the will reading, her eyes gleaming with triumph. Her clothes were wrinkled, her makeup smeared from tears. Her hair, once perfectly styled, hung limp around her face. She clutched her purse as though it were a lifeline, her knuckles white against the worn leather. "Mother," she whispered, her voice hoarse, broken. "Please, may I come in?" I stepped aside, watching her shuffle into the house like a stranger who no longer remembered how to hold her head high. She paused in the living room, glancing around as though seeing it for the first time. Her eyes flicked toward the mantel where Henry's photograph still stood, his smile frozen in time. She lowered her gaze quickly, unable to hold it. I gestured toward the chair across from me at the table. "Sit." She sank into the seat, shoulders caving inward. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the tick of the clock on the wall, each second louder than the last. Finally, she broke the silence. "They took everything," she said, her voice trembling. "The house, the car, the accounts. I have nothing left. I've been staying in cheap motels. I can barely afford food. I didn't know where else to go." I studied her, searching for the woman I once knew, the little girl who had once clung to my skirt when thunderstorms frightened her. But the years and the choices she had made had carved away at that child, leaving someone brittle and lost. "Why here?" I asked quietly. Her eyes brimmed with tears. "Because you're my mother, and I have nowhere else." Her words cut deeper than I expected. For so long she had treated me as though I were a burden, an obstacle standing in the way of her wealth. Now, stripped of all that, she looked at me not with contempt, but with desperate need. I rose without another word and went to the stove. From the pot, I ladled a bowl of vegetable soup I had made earlier that day, setting it in front of her with a slice of bread. She stared at it as though it were a feast, her tears dripping silently onto the table. Then she began to eat, each spoonful shaky, hurried, as though she feared it might be taken from her. Ethan came down the stairs then, his footsteps hesitant. When he saw her, his eyes widened, but he said nothing. He glanced at me, waiting for a sign of what to do. I gave a small nod. He sat at the end of the table, watching his mother in silence. When Samantha finished, she wiped her face with the back of her hand, then looked at me with a mixture of shame and pleading. "Please let me stay. Just for a night. I won't ask for more." I folded my hands, meeting her gaze steadily. "You may sleep on the couch. I'll give you a blanket." Relief washed over her face, but it was tinged with humiliation. She nodded quickly, unable to meet my eyes. Later, as I tucked a blanket around her on the couch, she whispered, "I'm sorry, Mother. I know I was cruel. I know I mocked you. I thought I was stronger than you. But look at me now." Her voice broke, and for the first time in years, I heard her sound like a child again. I sat at the edge of the couch, my hand resting on the blanket. "This is mercy, Samantha. A roof for the night, a meal in your stomach. But mercy is not forgiveness. Forgiveness must be earned, and you are not there yet." She closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks, and turned onto her side. I stood and left her in silence, my heart heavy but steady. Later, in my bedroom, Ethan lingered by the door. His brow was furrowed, his eyes uncertain. "Grandma," he said softly, "why didn't you give her more? She's your daughter." I set Henry's journal down on the nightstand and looked at him. Because love without accountability is not love. Mercy is food and shelter. Forgiveness must be chosen, and she has not chosen it yet. If I gave her everything now, it would be wasted. He nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of my words. For a long time he said nothing, then whispered, "I think I understand." That night, the house carried a strange tension. The faint sound of Samantha's muffled sobs drifted down the hallway, mixing with the quiet breaths of Ethan asleep in his room. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the ache of what had been lost and the quiet firmness of what I could not give back. At dawn, when I came downstairs, the couch was empty. The blanket was folded neatly, the bowl rinsed in the sink. Samantha was gone. There was no note, no goodbye, only silence. I stood in the kitchen, my hands gripping the back of a chair, and felt a strange mixture of sorrow and release. She had come to me, broken and desperate, but she had left without trying to rebuild what truly mattered. The choice was hers, and she had walked away. As the morning light streamed through the window, I sat at the table with Henry's journal open beside me. The words seemed to echo louder than ever. "Legacy lives where love survives." The morning after Samantha's brief return, the house felt strangely hollow. I sat at the kitchen table with Henry's journal open, a pen poised above a blank sheet of paper. Ethan lingered nearby, watching me with quiet curiosity. The weight of everything that had unfolded pressed against me, heavier than any silence I had known. My children had made their choices, and now I had to make mine. For weeks, I had avoided this moment. I told myself that leaving things unwritten might delay the inevitable, as though putting pen to paper would sever the last thread connecting me to the family I had once dreamed of. But the truth could no longer be postponed. Henry had left me not only the means to protect myself, but also the responsibility to decide the future. I called Mr. Bennett that morning. His voice on the other end was calm, steady, as though he had been expecting the call. By noon, he was at my door, briefcase in hand, his eyes kind but unreadable. He sat across from me at the dining table, where the morning sunlight spilled in golden lines across the wood. He laid out the papers with practiced care, sliding them toward me with the gravity of a man who understood the finality of such moments. "This will reflect your wishes," he said softly. no one else's. I read through every line slowly, carefully. To my children, I left only the things they could not twist into currency: old photographs, journals, small mementos of the years when they were still mine in more than name. These were not gifts of wealth, but fragments of memory, shards of what they had abandoned when greed consumed them. To Ethan, I left everything else: the house, the trusts, the accounts, the properties Henry had guarded so carefully. It was not a gift of fortune alone, but a torch handed to a boy who had proven himself worthy by simply standing beside me when all others had turned away. When the pen touched the paper, my hand no longer trembled. I signed with clarity, with a steadiness I hadn't known in years. As the ink dried, it felt less like closing a door and more like sealing a promise not to the past, but to the future. Bennett watched me, his expression solemn but approving. "You've done what needed to be done," he said, "and you've done it with wisdom." After he left, the house was quiet again. Ethan and I sat by the fireplace, the newly signed will tucked safely into the folder on the mantel. He was quiet for a long time, staring into the flames, before finally asking, "Why me?" I turned to him, studying his young face lit by firelight. There was still so much innocence in him, yet he carried shadows of the man he would become. I could see Henry in his jawline, in the set of his shoulders, in the seriousness with which he carried burdens that should have been far too heavy for his years. "Because you never left," I said simply. "Because when others turned their backs, you stood with me. Because your heart has not been consumed by the hunger that destroyed your parents." His eyes glistened, though he quickly turned his face toward the flames to hide it. But I saw, and in that moment I felt something shift, something deep and unshakable. He was no longer just my grandson. He was my companion in survival, my partner in rebuilding. That evening I baked bread, something I hadn't done in years. The smell filled the kitchen, warm and sweet, carrying memories of mornings long ago when Henry sat with his newspaper, smiling faintly at me over his coffee. Ethan came in, his hair damp from washing, and grinned when he saw the loaf on the counter. "You baked," he said, almost in disbelief. "I baked," I replied, sliding the bread onto a plate. "Cooking is survival. Baking is hope." He laughed, the sound ringing through the kitchen like sunlight breaking into shadow. For the first time in so long, I laughed too. We ate together at the table, the bread still steaming between us. No lawyers, no documents, no arguments. Just a grandmother and her grandson sharing a simple meal, stitched together not by obligation, but by choice. Later, as the fire dimmed and the house settled into quiet, I tucked the folder away in my locked cabinet, the key resting in my pocket. I lay in bed, the day's decisions heavy but steady inside me. The papers had been signed, the future secured. My children had chosen their path, and I had chosen mine. It was not triumph I felt, nor vengeance, but a steadier, quieter thing. A sense of order restored, of clarity carved from chaos. My life no longer belonged to those who mocked me, who tried to strip me of my dignity. It belonged to me, and to the boy upstairs who had chosen love when it mattered most. The autumn sun slanted across the porch, washing everything in a soft orange glow. I sat in Henry's old rocking chair, a knitted blanket over my knees, listening to the creak of the wood as I swayed gently back and forth. The air smelled faintly of leaves and smoke from a neighbor's fireplace. Ethan was in the yard, raking the fallen leaves into uneven piles, humming under his breath. His tune was clumsy, but it filled the air with a kind of warmth that wrapped around me like a second blanket. I watched him for a long while, letting the simple sight settle deep inside me. A boy becoming a man, steady in the way he moved, uncomplaining, carrying the weight of responsibility without ever having asked for it. And yet, unlike his mother or uncle, he did not wear that weight with greed or pride. He bore it with kindness. On my lap rested Henry's journal, worn now at the corners, the ink fading in places from the touch of my fingers. I opened it carefully, turning to the last entry Henry had written. His handwriting was steady, precise, every letter crafted with care. The words blurred slightly as my eyes filled, but they were no longer tears of grief. They were something softer, something that tasted of gratitude. He had written, "If you are reading this, my love, then my journey is done. But remember, strength is not measured in riches, nor in victories shouted from rooftops. It is measured in the quiet endurance of truth, in the choice to stand tall when others expect you to fall. It is in the courage to keep loving, even when love is not returned. And it is in the lives we touch, the hearts we leave behind, stronger than they were before." I pressed my hand to the page, my throat tightening. For so long, I thought I needed him here to hold me steady. But in truth, he had left me every tool I needed. His words had become the rope I clung to when the waters rose, the compass I followed when shadows grew long. And now, as I looked out at Ethan, I realized Henry's greatest gift was not the money, nor the properties, nor even the carefully planned traps that had saved me from ruin. His true gift was the faith that I could do this, that I could survive, fight, and rebuild. Ethan must have felt my gaze because he looked up from his work, his face flushed from effort. He waved, his grin bright and boyish, despite the seriousness he often carried. I raised my hand in return, and for a moment, the distance between porch and yard felt like no distance at all. Later, as evening fell, we sat by the fireplace. The flames cracked and hissed, throwing shifting light across the walls. Ethan dozed off in the chair beside me, his head tilted awkwardly, his hands slack. I set Henry's journal on the table and watched the boy who had stood by me when no one else had. My heart swelled with a quiet pride. I thought of Samantha, of Daniel, of the choices they had made. They had torn themselves apart with their hunger, and though part of me would always ache for the children I once knew, I no longer carried the weight of their cruelty on my shoulders. They had written their story with their own hands. Mine was different now. The silence of the room was not the same silence that had once haunted me. It was not the heavy, suffocating stillness of betrayal. It was softer, a silence that asked no questions, that demanded no proof. It was peace. When Ethan stirred awake, blinking and stretching, he caught me watching him. "What?" he asked with a sheepish smile. "Nothing," I replied, shaking my head with a smile of my own. "Just proud." He looked down, embarrassed, but I could see the way his shoulders straightened, the way the words planted themselves deep inside him. Before bed, I walked through the house one last time that night. The repaired porch, the newly painted walls, the cleared garden, all of it stood as evidence of what we had built together. And as I returned to my room, Henry's journal in hand, I felt whole in a way I hadn't thought possible again. I sat on the edge of my bed, opened to the final page, and whispered into the quiet, "You were right, Henry. I am stronger than I believed." Outside, the wind rustled the leaves, carrying away the last whispers of the storm we had endured, and in their place there was only calm. My children had once laughed at me, certain I was defeated. They had believed I was nothing more than an obstacle, a fragile widow too weak to resist. But they had been wrong. I had endured. I had risen. And in the end, it was not their fortune, nor even Henry's estate that defined me. It was the courage to keep standing when everything tried to bring me down. I leaned back in the rocking chair, Henry's journal pressed to my chest, and listened to the sound of Ethan humming again in the yard. A new life stretched before us, scarred but steady, quiet but strong. And as the firelight flickered, I closed my eyes, letting the peace settle into me like a final gift. For the first time in a long, long time, I felt complete.